Every house, every king, and every battle has its own truth. But there are stories older than crowns, darker than the night, and more dangerous than any blade. They were never written in books. They were whispered to fire, to the trees, and to the dead gods. And today, we dare to uncover one of them. The cold winds of the north whispered through the halls of Winterfell, carrying with them the smell of snow and iron. The direwolves howled beyond the walls, their voices rolling like distant thunder, and the ravens circled the high towers under a sky of pale gray. In those ancient stones, carved by hands long dead, Lord Eddard Stark ruled with a quiet strength, a man bound by honor, duty, and the old ways of the North. It was late in the season when the royal banners first appeared beyond the walls, shimmering gold against the frost. The Stag of Baratheon stood beside the Lion of Lannister, and their arrival brought not only the king, but the scent of southern schemes and restless ambition. For 15 years, peace had endured between the great houses, but peace, like a blade too long in its sheath, had begun to rust. King Robert Baratheon came to Winterfell not as the conqueror of old, but as a weary man burdened by his own victories. His laughter still shook the rafters, yet there was a shadow in his eyes, and his armor strained against a body grown heavy with age and wine. When he embraced Ned Stark in the courtyard, snow crunched beneath their boots, and the memory of their youth seemed, for a moment, to flicker back to life. "Come south with me, Ned," the king said as they walked the battlements. "Be my hand. I need a man I can trust." It was a simple request, spoken between old friends. But beneath the words, the winds of change stirred. Ned looked out over the fields of his home, the frozen lakes, the white forests, the gray skies that had shaped him. To leave them for the heat and deceit of King's Landing was a thing his heart resisted, yet he knew that duty rarely waited upon desire. "My place is here," Ned said at first. "The North needs its lord." "The realm needs you more," Robert answered, his voice low, roughened by regret. "Jon Arryn is dead. He was as a father to us both. I need someone who will not lie to me. Someone who remembers what honor means." At that name, Jon Arryn, a shadow passed between them. The old hand's death had come suddenly, too suddenly. Whispers said he had fallen ill, but others claimed he'd been silenced. His last words, spoken to his wife before he died, were strange. "The seed is strong." None yet knew what they meant. Ned turned the matter over in his thoughts through that long night. He stood before the heart tree in the godswood, the carved face of the old god weeping red sap into the snow. The stillness there was deep as a grave. His breath rose in pale clouds as he spoke softly to the silence. "If this be my duty, give me the strength to see it done." The next morning, he told his family of his decision. Lady Catelyn's eyes were full of worry, though she hid it behind calm words. Robb stood tall beside his mother, already a young lord in bearing, while Arya scowled at the thought of leaving home. Bran, eager and wide-eyed, begged to go south, though his father forbade it gently. Only Jon Snow, the quiet bastard boy, stood apart, knowing his place was never to be beside the king. Before the royal party departed, there was a feast held in the great hall, bright with fire and music. The Lannisters glittered like coins among the gray firs of the north. Queen Cersei with her beauty cold as polished glass, her twin brother Jaime clad in gold, and their dwarf brother Tyrion with his sharp eyes and sharper tongue. Beneath the merriment ran a current of tension, faint but unmistakable. At the high table, Ned watched them carefully. He had not lived half a lifetime in the north to miss the scent of danger. The queen's smile never reached her eyes, and Jaime's laughter carried an edge of mockery. Yet it was not the twins that troubled him most. It was the way the king looked, weary, careless, surrounded by flatterers. The realm he had won was beginning to rot beneath him when the morning came, and the king's party prepared to depart. Ned knelt beside the tombs of his ancestors in the crypts. The air was cold as stone, and the torches burned with a dull orange light. He spoke softly to the silent kings and queens of old, their faces carved in the likeness of sleep. "I will go," he said, "for the sake of the realm, for the sake of the king I once called brother." Above, the horn sounded. Snow drifted from the towers as the gates of Winterfell opened. The king's column began to move, knights and squires, banners and wagons, bright against the gray north. Ned rode beside Robert, the direwolf banner of Stark trailing behind. As Winterfell faded into the white distance, the howls of the direwolves followed them like an omen. Behind Ned, his children watched until the last rider disappeared from view. None of them yet knew that this farewell would be the breaking of their house, and that the road south would lead not to honor, but to doom. For in the south, beneath the red keep of King's Landing, the lion was already stirring, and the first victim of the Lannisters had begun his journey to meet his fate. The road south wound through green fields and ancient forests, where sunlight filtered through the branches in shifting gold. For many days, the company rode beneath clear skies, and though the king laughed and drank and hunted, Ned Stark felt a weight upon his heart that no fair weather could lift. The further they went from the cold and honesty of the north, the more uneasy he became. At first, the journey seemed almost pleasant. King Robert was loud and merry, boasting of old battles, drinking from his great horn, and calling for songs of rebellion and valor. He spoke often of their youth, of the days when they had fought side by side, shoulder to shoulder, against the Mad King's armies. But each time he spoke of the past, the laughter came a little harder, and the silence after grew a little longer. "The gods take us all in time," Robert said one evening as the campfire crackled low. "But they have been cruel to me, Ned. I was meant to be a warrior, not a king. Look at me now, trapped in this cage of a crown." Ned watched the flames dance, their light flickering across the king's face. The Robert he remembered had been all fire and thunder, the warhammer in his hand like a weapon of the gods. Now that fire burned dimly, hidden beneath flesh gone soft, and eyes that searched for joy in a cup of wine. "You are still the king," Ned said quietly, "and still my friend. The realm needs you, Robert." "The realm," Robert muttered, spitting into the fire. "The realm is full of vipers and liars. The Lannisters. They would bleed it dry if I let them. You'll see, Ned. Their smiles are knives." It was rare to hear such words from the king, and rarer still that he spoke them aloud. Ned turned them over in his mind long after the fire had burned to embers. By the time they reached the rolling plains of the Reach, the royal party had grown weary. Tents rose like pale sails each night, and the air grew warmer, heavy with the scent of summer. It was there, beneath a cloudless sky, that tragedy struck. Bran, Ned's son, had been left behind at Winterfell, yet a raven came bearing dark tidings, a message that froze Ned's heart. The boy had fallen from a tower and lay broken, neither dead nor alive. Ned's hand clenched around the parchment as he read. The words blurred before his eyes. His wife would be alone now, tending a child who might never wake. And here he was, bound by duty, unable to return. Robert, seeing the pain in his friend's face, clasped his shoulder. "The boy will live," he said, though his voice carried little certainty. "The gods will not take him from you." But Ned had long ceased to believe that the gods spared good men from sorrow. When they finally came within sight of King's Landing, the city sprawled before them like a great beast, red roofs and golden towers gleaming in the sun, the walls thick and cruel as old scars. Above it all rose the Red Keep, perched on Aegon's hill like a crown of blood and stone. The air smelled of salt and smoke, and beneath the songs of the city, there was a hum of tension, as if the stones themselves whispered of secrets and lies. They entered through the gates amid fanfare and shouts. The small folk cheered the king's arrival, though many voices called out the queen's name instead. Cersei rode at Robert's side, her face serene, her hair a shining river of gold. Beside her, her twin brother Jaime rode in armor polished like sunlight, his smile sharp as a blade. Ned watched them from behind the king and thought again of Robert's warning. He remembered the stories, how Jaime Lannister had slain the Mad King to save the city, yet no one called him hero. Oaths broken once, Ned knew, were easily broken again. Inside the Red Keep, the court gathered in splendor. The small council awaited Ned's arrival. Lord Peter Baelish, smooth of tongue and sly of smile, Varys the eunuch, whose whispers reached into every shadow, Grand Maester Pycelle, old and ponderous, and Renly Baratheon, the king's bright and eager brother. Their words were courteous, their welcomes warm, yet every glance felt measured, every smile rehearsed. In that chamber of power, Ned felt as if he stood in a nest of serpents. That night, he began his work as Hand of the King. Reports and ledgers lay piled upon his table, bearing witness to a realm slowly decaying. The treasury was empty, the debts vast, and much of the gold owed to House Lannister. Robert, it seemed, had spent his peace as recklessly as he had once spent his blood. When Ned brought the matter before him, Robert only waved a hand. "What's a few debts among friends? The Lannisters are rich, let them pay. We'll have a grand tourney for your appointment. 7 days of feasting and fighting. The realm will love you for it." Ned frowned. "The realm cannot eat tournaments, your grace." But the king would not be swayed. "You've grown sour, Ned. This is no time for counting coppers. We fought to live like kings, not clerks." And so the tourney was declared. Messengers rode out across the realm, and soon knights came flooding into the city, banners bright, armor shining, each seeking glory or gold. Yet behind their splendor, Ned felt the shadow deepening. In the days that followed, he began his search for truth. Jon Arryn's death, he was certain, was no accident. He met with the man's former servants, questioned his maester, and spoke quietly with Varys and Littlefinger, though he trusted neither. Piece by piece, a pattern began to form. Jon Arryn had been seeking something before his death, visiting blacksmiths, questioning maids, and searching the royal line. And in his final days, he had spoken often of King Robert's bastards. Ned rode through the city in secret to follow the same path. He found the armorer's apprentice, a boy with the king's dark hair and blue eyes, strong, broad-shouldered, yet born to a common woman. Robert's features were in him as clear as dawn. When Ned returned to the Red Keep, his heart was heavy. "The seed is strong," he whispered, remembering Jon Arryn's dying words. It was then that he began to see the truth taking shape. Terrible, unthinkable, and yet undeniable. If Robert's true-born children bore none of his features, then whose blood ran in their veins? and as he looked upon Joffrey's golden hair and Cersei's proud face across the feasting table that night, the answer rose in his mind like a cold wind from the crypts of Winterfell. The lion and the lioness, brother and sister, king's children born of sin. He said nothing aloud, but from that moment the fate of Eddard Stark was sealed. In the days that followed his grim discovery, Lord Eddard Stark walked the halls of the Red Keep as a man burdened by ghosts. The truth he carried was like a blade pressed to his breast, sharp, perilous, and impossible to ignore. Yet he dared not speak it aloud. The very stones of King's Landing seemed to listen, and in every shadow he imagined golden eyes watching him. Summer had deepened over the city. The heat clung to the air like a curse, heavy with the stink of the streets. From dawn to dusk, the cries of merchants and beggars rose from Flea Bottom, mingling with the ringing of bells from the septs. But within the castle walls, another sort of noise stirred. Whispers, rumors, and the faint rustle of plodding wings. Ned seldom slept. Each night, he sat long in his solar, reading over John Arryn's ledgers by candlelight. The old hand had been a careful man, keeping notes of every visit, every name. A pattern emerged slowly. The same households, the same black-haired bastards scattered across the city. Robert's blood flowed freely, yet none of his supposed heirs shared his look. He could not unsee it now. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen, golden of hair, fair of face, their features mirrored in their uncle Jaime. It was a truth too monstrous to speak, yet one that screamed its own proof. Catelyn's raven had reached him, bringing new unease. Bran lived, though he had not woken, and there had been an attempt on the boy's life. The assassin carried a blade of Valyrian steel, too fine, too rare for any common killer. The dagger had been traced to Tyrion Lannister, though Littlefinger swore the imp had lost it in a wager long ago. Catelyn had gone to seize Tyrion herself, taking him prisoner in the Vale. The act would not go unanswered. Ned knew it at once. The game had begun, and the North was now entangled in the web of lions. When next he met the Queen, her smile was bright as sunlight on a blade. "You look troubled, Lord Stark," Cersei said, her voice soft, her green eyes unblinking. King's Landing does that to northern men. Too hot, too full of life. Too full of lies, Ned thought, though he bowed instead. "I have much to learn, Your Grace. John Arryn's passing has left matters unsettled." "Ah, John Arryn," she said, tilting her head. "He was a kind old man. We miss him dearly." Her tone was smooth as silk, yet her eyes flickered, just for a moment. And in that glance, Ned saw the serpent beneath the rose. That evening, he met with Peter Baelish in the gardens. The air was sweet with the scent of lemon and mint, though the words they shared were bitter. "You play a dangerous game, Lord Stark," Littlefinger said, lounging against a marble bench, his lips curved in a smirk. "If you mean to accuse lions of breeding dragons, you had best have claws of your own." "I seek no game," Ned replied. "Only truth." Baelish chuckled softly. "Truth is a coin with two faces. Be careful which you spend and where." He leaned closer. "If you mean to move against the Queen, do so quickly. She has ears everywhere, and when the lioness feels cornered..." "She strikes," Ned finished, his voice like iron. The next morning brought dire tidings. The king had gone hunting, eager for sport and wine, leaving the court to its own devices. Ned wished he had gone with him, yet matters of the council held him fast. 2 days later, Robert returned, borne on a litter, pale and broken. A boar's tusk had torn his side open, and the wound festered with fever. Blood stained his clothes, and his laughter was gone. The smell of death hung about him like smoke. Ned stood by the bed as Maester Pycelle worked his leeches. Robert's face was gray with pain, yet his voice still held the strength of command. "Write it down, Ned," he rasped. "My will. Joffrey is but a boy. You'll serve as regent until he comes of age." Ned took up the quill, his hand steady despite the storm within, but he changed the words. "My rightful heir," he wrote, "not my son Joffrey." It was a small defiance, yet the only one left to him. When Robert's eyes closed for the last time, the chamber fell silent, save for the crackle of candles. A great king was gone, and the realm stood upon the edge of chaos. That night, Varys came to him in secret. The eunuch's soft slippers made no sound as he entered. "It is done, my lord," he whispered. "The king is dead, but the queen moves swiftly. She will crown Joffrey before the dawn." Ned looked up from his desk, his face carved from stone. "Then she makes her claim on treason. The boy is not the king's seed." Varys's eyes flickered. "Then you mean to tell the realm?" "I must. Robert wished Stannis to rule after him. I will summon the guard and proclaim it at once." "Ah," Varys murmured. "But will the guard obey? Sir Barristan, perhaps. Yet the gold cloaks take their orders from the city watch, and their loyalty, I fear, is not bought with honor." Ned's jaw tightened. "I will not be ruled by fear." "Then be ruled by wisdom," the spider said, bowing low. "For the game you play is not one of swords, but of shadows, and shadows have many daggers." When dawn came, the throne room filled with courtiers and guards. The Iron Throne loomed over them, black, twisted, forged from 1,000 conquered blades. Upon it sat Cersei's son, Joffrey Baratheon, golden-haired and smug, with his mother standing proud beside him. "Lord Stark," Cersei called, her voice echoing. "The king is dead. All hail his son, Joffrey of the houses Baratheon and Lannister." Ned stepped forward, the sealed will in his hand. The king's last command was clear. His heir is Lord Stannis Baratheon. A hush fell. Cersei's smile did not waver. "Tear that paper in half," she said softly. Ned met her gaze, his voice unbending. "You will not deny the truth forever. The realm will learn what you are, and what your children are." Her eyes burned cold fire. "When you play the game of thrones, my lord, you win or you die." Then the gold cloaks moved. Petyr Baelish's men turned their spears, not against the queen, but against Ned. "I did warn you not to trust me," Littlefinger whispered as the blades closed in. Steel rang out, shouts filled the hall, and in that single moment, Eddard Stark understood how the South repaid honor with betrayal. His men fell one by one, outnumbered until only silence remained. Dragged before the throne, his sword torn from his hand, he looked upon Joffrey's smirking face and thought only of his children, far away in the Red Keep, unknowing. "Take him," the boy king commanded. And so, the first true servant of the realm was cast into chains, while the lions began their feast of power. Outside, the bells tolled for Robert Baratheon, last of the warrior kings. But the sound carried a different meaning through the city, not mourning, but the echo of war's first breath. For Ned Stark's fall was the first blow in a storm that would drown the realm in blood. In the black cells beneath the Red Keep, where no light dared linger and the air reeked of damp and rot, Lord Eddard Stark awaited his fate. The days and nights blurred together, marked only by the faint drip of water and the muffled clatter of guards above. His leg ached from the wound he had taken in the throne room, and fever haunted his dreams. Dreams of snow and the howling of wolves, of home far beyond the southern sun, Sometimes he would wake believing he was still in Winterfell, the hearth warm and his children safe. But then the cold stones would remind him that the walls around him were no friends, and that honor, once his shield, had become his cage. He thought often of Robert, his oldest friend, loud, reckless, full of laughter and fire. Dead now, torn apart by his own folly, leaving a realm to vultures and snakes. He thought of Jon Arryn too, whose search for truth had led him to this same doom. The seed is strong, Jon had said. Yes, the seed was strong, and so was the root of treachery that now grew in the shadows of the Iron Throne. Footsteps echoed down the passage. A torch flared, and in its light appeared a soft, round face. Lord Varys, the master of whisperers. His silk robes whispered against the stones as he drew near, the scent of perfume masking the stink of the dungeons. "My Lord Hand," said the eunuch in his quiet voice, "you are not easy to visit. There are those above who would prefer you were forgotten." Ned lifted his head. "You keep strange company, Lord Varys. Thieves and jailers now?" Varys smiled faintly. "One must go where the truth hides, and in King's Landing, my dear lord, it often hides in the dark." He glanced toward the cell door, as though fearing unseen ears. "The queen holds the city in her claws. Her son sits upon the throne. The small council bends knee to her will. Yet all is not lost. Not yet." Ned's eyes, weary though they were, still held a spark of iron. "If you came for my confession, save your breath. I will not speak lies to please the Lannisters." "Lies?" Varys said softly. "Perhaps. But think of your daughters. Sansa remains at court, still betrothed to Joffrey. Arya, well, the gods alone know where she hides, though she lives, I am told. Would you see them safe?" The words struck him like a blade. "They are children," he said hoarsely. "They are innocent." "The Lannisters know no innocence," Varys replied. "But they do love appearances, a public confession, a promise of loyalty. Such things please them. Please the boy king, most of all." "Confession," Ned repeated. The word tasted like ash. "You ask me to betray my honor to save my life." "To save your children's," Varys corrected. "The queen wishes you dead. The boy wishes you humiliated. I am but a humble servant of peace, my lord. I offer you a way to keep both." Ned closed his eyes. The dungeon's silence pressed in. He thought of Catelyn's letters, of Bran lying broken, of Robb in the north gathering swords beneath the direwolf banner. The godswood of Winterfell came to his mind, the whisper of leaves, the cold kiss of snow. What is honor when those you love are in peril? "I will consider it," he said at last. Varys bowed his head. "Then there may yet be hope." When the eunuch was gone, the darkness seemed thicker than before. Ned lay back against the wall, his chains cold upon his wrists. He had lived his life by a simple creed: to speak truth, to act justly, to keep his word. Yet now, all those virtues had brought ruin upon his house. Elsewhere in the castle, Sansa Stark wept behind locked doors. She had begged the queen for mercy, pleaded for her father's release. Cersei had smiled that same smooth, pitiless smile. "Your father is a traitor, my sweet. The realm must see justice." Justice, Sansa thought, though she barely knew what the word meant anymore. Joffrey's golden hair gleamed like sunlight, his words honeyed and cruel. He promised her that all would be well, that her father need only confess and bend the knee. She believed him because she wanted to, because she had to. Beyond the city walls, war gathered. Word reached the Red Keep that Robb Stark rode south with 20,000 men, banners of white and gray fluttering above them. The River Lords had risen, and the Lannisters answered with fire and sword. The realm trembled on the edge of open bloodshed. Ned heard whispers of this through the jailer, hints carried in drunken mutters. His son had called the banners. The North had come for him. The thought stirred pride and dread in equal measure. He did not wish war, but neither would the wolves suffer chains forever. Then, one morning, the door opened, and light poured in for the first time in many days. Ser Barristan Selmy stood there in his white cloak, his face grave. "Lord Stark," he said quietly, "the Queen summons you. The boy king wishes to hear your confession before the sept." Ned's heart turned to stone. So this was the end. They brought him out into the daylight. The city was a sea of faces. Thousands gathered before the great sept of Baelor, their cries filling the air like the roar of a river. The sun was bright, too bright, and after so long in darkness it stabbed his eyes. He was led up the steps, his legs stiff, his body weakened by days of hunger. There, upon a wooden scaffold, stood Cersei and her son. Joffrey wore a crown that glittered in the light, and beside him, Sansa, pale as milk, tears shining upon her cheeks. Grand Maester Pycelle unrolled a scroll, his voice trembling as he read the charges: treason, conspiracy, falsehood, rebellion. The words washed over Ned like a tide. He lifted his eyes to the crowd and saw not their faces, but those of his children, his home, the snows of the north. Then he spoke. His voice was rough, but it carried. "I, Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, do confess to treason. I plotted against King Joffrey and sought to place Stannis Baratheon upon the throne. I am guilty. I beg his grace's mercy." A murmur ran through the crowd. Disbelief, sorrow, satisfaction. Cersei inclined her head slightly. All was proceeding as she had planned, but Joffrey rose, his boyish face alight with cruel delight. "My mother and the council may wish to spare you," he said, "but the king does not. Let the traitor die." Cersei's eyes widened in shock, her hand flying to her son's arm, but Joffrey only smiled. "Bring me his head." The words struck the world still. Sansa screamed. Sir Ilan Payne drew his sword, a long blade that shimmered like ice. The sound of it was the only thing Ned heard as the guards forced him to his knees. He looked once more to the sky, blue and distant, and thought of Winterfell, of snow drifting across the battlements, of the laughter of his children. A strange peace settled upon him. "Lord Eddard Stark," cried the herald, "Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North." The blade fell. The crowd roared. The bells began to ring, and high upon the steps of Baelor's Sept, beneath the golden lion banners, the first victim of the Lannisters fell, and the 7 kingdoms tumbled into war. The bells tolled through the streets of King's Landing long after the executioner's sword had fallen. Their iron voices echoed between the walls and towers, heavy and mournful, though few within the Red Keep felt sorrow. The Lannisters had triumphed. The Wolf of the North was slain. The Boy King sat upon his throne, and none dared defy him. Yet beyond the glitter of the capital, a storm had broken loose, vast, cold, and merciless. In the north, banners rose like winter's wrath. From White Harbor to the last hearth, men swore vengeance for Eddard Stark, their voices carried upon the icy wind. In Riverrun, the Tullys called their banners, joining their strength with the young lord of Winterfell. And so the realm, which had slumbered beneath uneasy peace, awoke once more to war. Robb Stark rode at the head of his host, not the boy who had watched his father ride south, but a lord full-grown in the forge of grief. The direwolf Grey Wind loped beside his horse, silent and swift. The soldiers who followed him were hardened men of the north, wrapped in furs and mail, their faces set like stone. They sang no songs and bore no boastful laughter. They rode for justice and for blood. At his side rode Great John Umber, tall as a tower and fierce as a bear, Rose Bolton, pale-eyed and quiet as frost, and the Blackfish Tully, grim and seasoned from a lifetime of battle. With them marched near 20,000 spears. They crossed the Neck, passed through Moat Cailin, the ancient gate of the north, and swept into the riverlands like a gray tide. The first battle came swift and hard. At the fords of the Green Fork, Robb struck at the vanguard of Lord Tywin Lannister's army. The fighting was brutal, steel clashing in the mud, arrows whispering death through the air. Young men who had never seen war before died beneath banners they had barely learned to follow. When the sun set, the waters of the Trident ran red. Though victory was uncertain, word spread through the camps that Robb Stark had outwitted his foe. With half his strength, he had drawn Tywin's men into battle, while with the other half, he rode east under Night's Cloak, crossing the river by the Twins, the great bridge fortress of House Frey. There, after uneasy parley with old Lord Walder Frey, he gained passage. His host thundered south to strike where the lions were least prepared. In the heart of the Riverlands lay Riverrun, seat of House Tully, besieged by Sir Jaime Lannister. The Kingslayer's banners ringed the castle like a tightening noose, but when dawn broke, Robb's host fell upon them from behind, and chaos followed. Gray wind tore through the enemy lines, his jaws red with Lannister blood. Men cried out in terror, for they said the beast fought with the fury of the slain lord, whose blood he shared. Robb's horse reared, his sword gleaming, and his cry carried across the field. Winterfell! It was a day of slaughter. By sunset, the Lannisters broke and fled. Jaime himself was taken, dragged before Robb in chains, his golden hair matted with blood. The young wolf looked down upon his captive, his face unreadable. "My father's bones lie cold because of you," he said. Jaime laughed, even bound. "Then you have his courage, boy, but courage won't save you from what comes next." Robb said nothing more. The North had its first victory, but not its last battle. When word of Ned Stark's death reached the campfires that night, a heavy silence fell. No man drank, no song rose to the stars. They buried their grief in oaths of vengeance. It was then that Great John Umber rose among them, his voice like thunder. "The South has their boy king of lions, but we have our wolf. I'll have no Lannister nor Baratheon as my lord. Let us call our own king, the king in the North." A murmur rippled through the gathered lords. Then another voice joined it, and another, until the cry swelled like a storm. "The king in the North!" Robb Stark stood, his eyes shining in the torchlight. He did not seek the crown, yet he did not refuse it either. "If you make me your king," he said, "then I swear by ice and fire, I will avenge my father's death and bring justice to his name." And so they named him king, the first the North had known since Torrhen Stark bent the knee to Aegon Targaryen 300 years before. The lords knelt, swords raised, voices won. "The king in the North!" Across the realm, the war spread like wildfire. Lord Tywin gathered his armies anew, calling every bannerman to his side. The Freys wavered, counting where profit might lie. In King's Landing, Cersei Lannister ruled through her son, weaving her intrigues while the boy king played at cruelty. Sansa Stark remained her prisoner, a flower caught in iron thorns. Each day she was made to kneel before Joffrey, to smile and praise the boy who had murdered her father. Once she had dreamed of being queen, now she dreamed only of escape. Yet even in despair she learned, She watched, she listened, and in silence she began to understand the game her father had never wished her to play. Far to the east, word of the war reached other ears. In the lands beyond the narrow sea, a silver-haired queen walked the red sands with 3 newborn dragons at her side. Her name was Daenerys Targaryen, last of the Dragon Lords. Though the people of Westeros did not yet know it, her destiny and the wolves were already drawing together like 2 rivers bound for the same sea. In the north, winter's breath grew colder. Snow fell upon the battlements of Winterfell, where the old gods watched in silence. The direwolves howled beneath the pale moon, as if mourning their fallen lord and calling their kin to war. From the wall came grim tidings, wildlings gathering, strange lights upon the horizon, whispers of things long dead that walked again in the night. But few in the south heeded such tales. Men were too busy killing one another to remember that older, darker wars might yet awaken. The War of the 5 Kings had begun, a war born from a single blade's fall, from the death of one just man. And though none could see it then, the shadow of Eddard Stark still lingered across the land, as if his honor, once broken, had become a ghost that haunted them all. For in the 7 kingdoms, truth is not easily buried, and winter never forgets. Snow fell softly upon the battlements of Winterfell, whispering against the stones as though the old gods themselves murmured in mourning. The great hall was quiet, the hearths dim. Lady Catelyn Stark sat alone before the flames, her hands clasped tight around a folded parchment that smelled faintly of wax and travel dust. The words within were brief. Your husband is dead. The North is at war. Robb rides victorious. She had read them 100 times, and yet could not decide whether to weep or pray. The boy she had borne had become a king, but the man she had loved was lost to her forever. Beyond the walls, the direwolves howled, their cries long and lonesome, and she fancied they mourned with her. Each morning she walked to the godswood, where the heart tree stood white and solemn in the snow. There she spoke to her gods, though she was not of the old faith, because the words had nowhere else to go. Guide him, she whispered. Keep him safe. Let him be wiser than the rest of us. But the gods were silent, as they had been since the dawn of war. Far to the south, her son sat beneath a gray sky, surrounded by the banners of his new kingdom. The camp stretched for miles along the riverbank, fires burning low beneath the wind. Robb Stark, king in the north, stared into the flames with the grave eyes of a man far older than his years. The victory at River Run had given the North hope, yet it had also chained him to a burden heavier than armor. Lords quarreled over next moves. Messages arrived daily, each bearing news of betrayal, siege, or blood. Lord Tywin regrouped in the west, gathering power. Renly Baratheon had crowned himself king in Highgarden, while Stannis proclaimed his own claim from Dragonstone. The realm tore itself into pieces, and each piece demanded fealty or fire. At his side, Catelyn had come at last, weary from her long road. Her face was thin, her eyes hollowed by grief, but her voice remained steady when she spoke. You have won battles, she said, but wars are not won with swords alone. The Lannisters hold Sansa, and Arya may yet live. We must make peace, if only to save them. Robb shook his head. How can there be peace with those who murdered my father? Because vengeance will not bring him back, she said softly, and vengeance will not fill the halls of Winterfell again. He turned from her, his jaw tight. I cannot yield, not now. The men call me their king. If I bend, the North breaks. Catelyn reached out, resting her hand upon his arm. Then rule wisely, my son. Rule as your father would have. His strength was not in the sword, but in the truth of his heart. That night, when she had gone, Robb stood alone beneath the stars. He could almost hear his father's voice, calm, firm, filled with the steady weight of honor. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. He looked out over the camp, where thousands of men lay sleeping, and felt both the weight of a crown and the loneliness it brought. In the days that followed, ravens flew from every tower. Some bore tidings of war, the Greyjoys stirring in their cold isles, Renly slain by his brother's sorcery, Stannis broken upon the Blackwater, and Joffrey Baratheon's cruelty growing unchecked in King's Landing. The Lannisters ruled the city with gold and fear, while the small folk starved and whispered prayers to false gods. Sansa Stark walked among them sometimes, veiled and guarded, her face pale as a ghost's. She had learned to smile when spoken to bow when ordered, to swallow her hatred like poison. But inside her heart, something colder than grief was forming. She had begun to understand that survival, too, was a weapon. Joffrey paraded before his court like a golden idol, cruel and vain, delighting in others' pain. The Queen Mother whispered behind him, her hand on the reins of his rule, though she smiled as if she were but a dutiful parent. And always, at her side, there stood Tyrion Lannister, the dwarf with mismatched eyes, who spoke softly and listened much. He had returned to the city as Hand of the King, and though Cersei scorned him, his cunning soon bent the court to his will. Where others sought glory, Tyrion sought survival. He saw in Sansa Stark not a foe, but a hostage worth keeping alive. "You're safer here than most," he told her once, his tone not unkind. "If you can bear it, play the game, my lady, or be played." And though his words chilled her, Sansa began to heed them. In the Riverlands, winter crept closer. The snows came early that year, softening the fields and freezing the rivers. Robb's host pressed on through the cold, striking where they could, retreating when they must. Victories turned hollow, and each triumph brought new loss. When the raven came bearing word that Winterfell had fallen, Robb's heart turned to ice. The letter spoke of betrayal. Theon Greyjoy, once his sworn brother, had turned against him, claiming the castle for his own and slaying its men. The dire wolves were scattered, Bran and Rickon dead or fled. Robb tore the parchment in two. "I treated him as a brother," he said bitterly, "and he repaid me with fire and treachery." His mother wept, but he did not. A king could not afford tears. War had devoured them all, fathers and sons, friends and faith alike. The river ran thick with blood, and each house carved its vengeance upon the bones of the realm. In the far north, beyond the wall, another war stirred, unseen, ancient. The Night's Watch rode in black silence, searching for signs of the dead. Among them rode Jon Snow, Eddard Stark's bastard son, whose heart carried the same quiet honor that had doomed his father. But the Snows hid secrets older than kings, and the shadows that moved there had no care for crowns. And so, as the north bled and the south burned, the true winter drew closer, silent, patient, and cruel. In King's Landing, beneath a sky the color of ash, Sansa Stark looked out across the city's rooftops. Smoke rose from the chimneys like ghosts. Somewhere beyond those walls, her brother marched beneath the direwolf banner. Somewhere beyond, vengeance and justice waited. She pressed a hand to her chest, where her heart beat slow and steady. "Winter is coming," she whispered, the words her father had taught her, the promise of a house unbroken. And though the lion ruled and the wolf lay buried, the north remembered. Always, the North remembered. Snow and cinders mingled upon the wind as the year waned toward its coldest heart. The North groaned beneath the weight of grief, yet the wolf banners still flew proud. From the frozen fields to the river crossings, songs of vengeance whispered through the camps of the young king, Robb Stark, whom men now called the Wolf King. But victory had grown brittle as frost. The crown weighed heavy upon his brow, and the road ahead was darker than any he had yet trod. For though he had won battles, he was losing the war of hearts and faith. The realm was bleeding, and winter would show no mercy. In his pavilion by the fords of the Trident, Robb stood over a map lit by flickering candles. Around him gathered his lords, Great John Umber, fierce and roaring, Rose Bolton, pale as cold iron, and Edmure Tully, his uncle, weary from too many losses. The smell of damp leather and steel filled the tent. "The Freys hold the twins," said Edmure, tracing the parchment with a grimy finger. "Without their bridge, we cannot cross the Green Fork again. We are caged." Robb's jaw tightened. "Then we will make peace with them. Lord Walder may be a miserly old crow, but he values his bargains." "Peace?" the Great John barked. "With a Frey? You swore one of his girls would be your bride, yet you took another to wife. There's no peace for oathbreakers, lad." Robb's face darkened. "I did what I must. Jane saved my honor, and I will not put her aside." Bolton's soft voice slid into the silence like a knife. "An honorable heart is a fine thing, Your Grace, but it seldom wins wars. The Freys do not forgive lightly. Perhaps we should prepare for less hospitable welcomes." The torches hissed as the wind pressed against the tent. Robb looked to each of them, his expression carved from stone. "We will go to the twins and mend what we can. I will face Lord Walder myself." Outside, the snow began to fall in earnest, cloaking the world in white. Days later, the king in the north rode west with his host. The rivers were swollen from early thaw, the fields sodden with the footprints of men and horses. At every village they passed, the people came forth, thin, hungry, but unbroken. They cheered for him, some in tears, and each cry of "the king in the north" stung him with both pride and guilt, for he saw in their faces what they had given and what little he could yet promise them in return. When at last the towers of the twins came into view, twin keeps of gray stone rising above the green water, the company halted. Ravens circled the battlements, and banners bearing the silver crossing of House Frey flapped in the chill wind. "Best to smile, Your Grace," said Catelyn, riding beside her son. "Lord Walder loves a man who remembers his courtesies." "He will have them," Robb said, though his mouth was a hard line. The Freys met them with drums and torches, their gates creaking open like a beast's jaws. Inside, warmth and feasting awaited, roast meats, mulled wine, laughter that did not reach the eyes. Lord Walder sat upon his dais, old as dust, his face a tangle of wrinkles and disdain. His brood surrounded him like a court of crows. "So," croaked the old man, "the king in the north remembers the Freys at last. Come to beg pardon, has he?" "I have come to make amends," Robb said evenly, "and to renew our bond." Lord Walder's lips curled into something not quite a smile. "Words are wind, boy, but my daughters are flesh. Still, perhaps there is a way for old wrongs to be forgiven." His eyes glinted with the promise of something sharp beneath the silk. For 3 days, the Freys feasted their guests. Wine flowed, songs were sung, and the hall rang with laughter. But beneath it all ran a current colder than the river outside. Catelyn felt it first, that unease that pricked at the back of her neck. The music was too loud, the smiles too wide. On the third night, as the candles burned low, the minstrels struck up a familiar tune. The Rains of Castamere. The sound chilled her blood. She turned sharply to Robb, who had risen to offer Lord Walder's daughter his hand. The girl blushed, the old man cackled, and in that laughter she heard betrayal. Then the doors were barred. Crossbow strings sang. Bolts flew through the smoky air. The hall erupted into screams as men fell where they stood. Robb spun, sword in hand, but there was no defense against treachery. The great John roared and went down beneath a dozen spears. Catelyn seized a dagger and struck at a Frey who came too close. Her cry, a mother's fury, made flesh. "Robb!" she screamed. "Run!" But there was nowhere to run. Arrows thudded into the tables, into flesh, into the hearts of loyal men. Wine spilled like blood across the rushes. The music played on, wild and mocking, as the feast became a slaughter. Catelyn fought her way toward her son. He was on his knees, clutching his side, eyes wide with disbelief. A Frey blade gleamed above him, and beside it, the pale cloak of Rose Bolton. "Jaime Lannister sends his regards," Bolton murmured, and drove the dagger home. Catelyn's scream tore the hall apart. She seized the nearest Frey by the hair, a girl, and pressed a blade to her throat. "Enough!" she cried. "You have killed him. You have killed my son. Let me go and I'll—" Her words were lost in the roar of the feast, a flash of steel, a cold touch at her throat, and then silence. When morning came, the trident carried the bodies of wolves downstream. The banners of House Stark lay trampled in the mud, soaked in red. The Freys flung open their gates, and from the towers of the twins flew a new banner, the Lion of Lannister beside the flayed man of Bolton. The North's great hope had been butchered in a single night. The realm shuddered beneath the weight of the deed. In the dungeons of King's Landing, Tyrion Lannister heard the news first. He closed his eyes and said nothing, for he knew what it meant. His sister would call it victory. His father would call it peace. But the gods, if they still watched, would call it what it was, a curse upon them all. And far away, beyond the narrow sea, a queen of dragons looked westward toward a land consumed by fire and betrayal. She did not know the Starks, nor the Freys, nor the Boltons. Yet that night, her dragons cried out beneath the stars, and their voices sounded like mourning. Thus ended the song of the young wolf, and though the world moved on, and kings rose and fell, the memory of that night would live forever in the whisper of rivers and in the hearts of those who remembered the name Stark. For from that feast of death was born a wrath that would one day return, cold, patient, and unstoppable as winter itself. The snows deepened over the north, burying the ruins of Winterfell beneath a white silence. Smoke still curled from the burned towers, rising into a sky heavy with storm. The hearths were cold, the courtyards empty. Only the crows feasted now, their black wings stark against the snow. The banners of House Stark had been torn down, their direwolf sigil smeared with ash and soot. The Freys called it victory, and the Lannisters named it peace, yet no peace came. Across the realm, the slaughter at the twins spread like a poisoned wind. The song of the Red Wedding reached every hall and tavern, twisting through the hearts of men, until none could hear it without rage or sorrow. In the Dreadfort, Rose Bolton took his seat as Warden of the North, his pale eyes as lifeless as ice. He ruled with a stillness that chilled his servants, and an obedience born of fear. Beside him prowled his bastard son, Ramsay Snow, a creature of cruelty cloaked in laughter. The boy had claimed Winterfell for his own, hunting men and women through its snow-choked ruins, feeding their screams to his hounds. "The North is mine now," Ramsay would say, his voice soft as silk. "Every wolf has its day, and mine has just begun." But even in ruin, Winterfell did not sleep. Beneath the collapsed towers and the snow-drowned halls, something ancient endured. The old magic of the North, bound in the roots of the weirwood, patient and watchful. The heart tree still bled red into the snow, its carved eyes open, seeing all. Far to the east, in the haunted wilderness beyond the wall, Jon Snow rode through the frozen wastes with the men of the Night's Watch. The War of Kings meant little there. In the far north, older wars stirred. The cold was endless, and the wind carried whispers that did not belong to men. Jon had been chosen Lord Commander, his black cloak rimed with frost, his sword Longclaw ever at his side. He had fought the wildlings, parleyed with their king, and seen things that defied all tales. The dead walked beyond the wall, blue-eyed shadows that could not be slain by steel or fire. "The true war is coming," he had told his brothers, "and it is not against men." The wall itself groaned in the cold, its vast face of ice lit by the ghostly glow of the moon. The ancient runes that guarded it flickered weakly, as though weary from long ages of neglect. Jon looked out from the top of the Frostfangs and saw in the distance the faint shimmer of movement, thousands of figures, silent, endless, marching south. "The others," whispered the old ranger beside him. Jon's breath froze in the air. He remembered his father's words, spoken long ago in the quiet of Winterfell. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword, and when the snows fall, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. But what pack remained to him now? His father was gone, his brothers slain or scattered. The pack was broken, and yet somewhere beyond the ice and ruin, Jon felt that same cold determination stirring. The blood of the North, the memory of honor that would not die. Meanwhile, across the narrow sea, in the golden heat of Meereen, Daenerys Stormborn, mother of dragons, sat upon a throne of her own making. Around her the freedmen of Slaver's Bay knelt, calling her Misa, mother, and her dragons wheeled above the city like living stars. But even as she ruled, her gaze turned westward, toward the lands of her birth. Word of the Lannisters' treachery had reached her. Tales of kings burned and wolves slain, of a realm devouring itself. "The usurper's line has grown weak," said Sir Barristan Selmy, white-haired and proud, one of her last true knights. "Now is the time to strike." Daenerys rose, her silver hair glinting in the torchlight. "My father's throne is stained with the blood of innocents. I will not take it with more of the same." "You will take it with dragons," whispered Jorah Mormont, his voice heavy with devotion and sorrow. She looked to the horizon, where the sea met the stars. "No," she said, "not yet. The fire is not ready. The world must feel the cold before it remembers warmth." And so, the pieces moved upon the great board, dragons stirring in the east, dead men walking in the north, and in the ruins of the realm, a handful of survivors clinging to hope. Arya Stark rode among them, though none knew her name. She had fled King's Landing disguised as a beggar, crossed half the realm with blade in hand, and vengeance in her heart. Each night she whispered the names of those who had wronged her: Cersei, Joffrey, Ilyn Payne, the Freys, the Boltons. Her list, a prayer and a promise. At last she reached Braavos, where the Titan shadow fell across the harbor and the air smelled of salt and secrets. There she came to the house of black and white, its doors open to the stranger and the lost. "A girl has many names," said the man who met her, his face changing like the tide. "But here she must learn to have none." So Arya became no one, and the wolf learned to wear the mask of the assassin. Yet even as she forgot herself, the North remembered. And in King's Landing, Sansa played her part, the lady in the cage, smiling for her captors, weaving her own web in silence. Petyr Baelish had taken her from the capital under a veil of secrecy, whispering promises of safety. Yet she knew his kindness was no gift. "Trust no one," her mother had once told her, least of all those who smile too easily. But Peter's smile was all she had. He brought her to the Eyrie, to her Aunt Lisa, whose madness was as treacherous as the mountains around her. The Vale lay untouched by war, its cliffs cold and sharp as knives, and there Sansa learned another kind of survival, not with steel, but with patience. The North was bleeding, the South was burning, the Wall trembled, the dragons dreamed, and in the quiet spaces between these storms, the land seemed to hold its breath, waiting, always waiting. For though the world had forgotten Lord Eddard Stark, though his bones lay far from the home he loved, the wind still whispered his words through the heart trees and the snows. Winter is coming, and when it came, it would come for all. The long winter crept slowly upon the Seven Kingdoms, though the people of the South still dared to call it autumn. In the North, snow already lay deep upon the hills, and the rivers were rimed with ice. Smoke rose from the hearths of lonely keeps, and wolves hunted close to the walls of men. The nights grew longer, the stars sharper, and the moon rode high like a cold blade. Beyond the Wall, the world had turned white and silent. The Night's Watch, black against the endless snow, held fast to their oaths, though their numbers dwindled with each moon. At Castle Black, Lord Commander Jon Snow stood atop the wall's frozen height and looked out upon the wilderness. The wind tore at his cloak, yet he did not feel the cold. His thoughts were elsewhere, with the dead men who walked and the living ones who refused to believe. He had seen them once, blue-eyed and merciless, their touch colder than the grave. He had seen a man he knew rise again, his skin pale as moonlight, his breath a mist of death. No tale told by old men could match the horror of what was now stirring in the frost. "They're coming," Jon murmured to himself, "and the Wall is not ready." At his side stood Samwell Tarly, quivering but resolute. "We've sent the ravens," Sam said. "To every lord, every city, someone will listen." Jon shook his head. "The realm is deaf to warnings. They fight each other for crowns while the dead gather their own army." Below, the brothers of the Watch went about their duties, patching the gate, tending the fires, sharpening their few remaining blades of dragonglass. The Black Brothers had always been few, but now they were fewer still, and their courage was all that kept the darkness at bay. As the wind keened like a lost soul, Jon thought of his family, the father who had died for honor, the brothers who had fallen, the sisters scattered to every corner of the world. He had taken the black to find his place, yet still he felt the pull of the blood in his veins, the call of Winterfell. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. His father's voice echoed through the snow. He would have done so gladly, had there been any justice left to wield. Far to the south, the lions still ruled in King's Landing, though their pride had grown thin. Queen Cersei sat the Iron Throne in all but name, for her son Tommen wore the crown yet acted only at her bidding. The realm called her a Queen Regent, but the whispers called her worse, the Mad Queen, the Widow of Kings, the Serpent of the Red Keep. Her beauty had not faded, though it had hardened. Each day she wrapped herself in gold and crimson, as if color could ward off the shadows of guilt. She dreamed of her father, Lord Tywin, whose death had left her both free and defenseless. She dreamed too of her brother Jaime, gone from her side to fight wars she no longer cared to name. And beneath all those dreams lay one face, Tyrion, the brother she hated, the imp she blamed for every sorrow. He had fled across the sea, leaving her vengeance unsatisfied. But she would find him, she swore it. No one escaped a lion's wrath forever. In her council chamber, lords and flatterers murmured of rebellions in the north, of strange tidings from the wall, of dragons rumored to have been born in the east. Cersei dismissed them all with a wave. "Fairy tales," she said. "Let them chase ghosts while I rule the living." Yet when night fell, she dreamed of fire, 3 shadows flying over the sea, their wings blotting out the sun, and she woke to find her hands trembling. Across the narrow sea, those dreams were already taking shape. In Meereen, Daenerys Targaryen walked among her people, veiled against the heat, the smell of spice and sweat thick in the air. Her dragons were grown now, great beasts of scale and flame. Drogon, the largest, could darken the sky with his wings, but the city that had hailed her as Misa now whispered of fear. The dragons had turned wild, devouring goats and men alike. The queen's rule, once born of mercy, was fraying under the weight of her own fire. Ser Barristan warned her gently, "Your Grace, the freedmen love you still, but love alone will not hold this city. You were not made to rule chains and markets. You were made for conquest." And in the quiet that followed, the truth of it stirred within her like the beating of a dragon's heart. That night, she climbed the steps of her great pyramid, the wind tangling her silver hair. From the summit, she could see the sea, dark, endless, waiting. Her ancestors had crossed those same waters with fire and blood. She was the last of their line. "Westeros," she whispered, "the land that was stolen, the throne that was mine." Drogon screamed from the sky, and the sound echoed over the city like a herald of doom. In the Vale, Sansa Stark lived beneath another name, Elaine Stone, the bastard daughter of Peter Baelish. The snows came late to the Eyrie, dusting the high peaks with silver. Below, the world seemed small and far away, but the Game of Thrones reached even there. Peter played it well. He flattered lords, sowed whispers, and built alliances out of nothing but charm and deceit. "The North remembers," he told her one evening as they stood upon the high balcony, the wind cold upon their faces. "But memory fades. It can be guided, shaped, turned to serve those clever enough to claim it." Sansa said nothing. She had learned to listen. She had learned that every kindness hid a dagger. Yet she also knew that the name Stark still held power, a spark that could one day kindle the North anew. When she closed her eyes at night, she saw her father's face, her mother's tears, her brother's crown broken and bloody. But she also saw something else. The walls of Winterfell, standing proud against the snow, waiting to be reclaimed. And in the shadows of the world, another Stark moved unseen. Arya, no longer a child, no longer even a girl in truth, trained among the faceless men of Braavos. Her heart was colder than it once had been, her eyes sharper. She could change her face as others changed their cloaks. Yet beneath each new visage, a single name still burned: Stark. The gods of death had taken her family, but she would learn their secrets and turn them back upon her enemies. Thus, while queens and kings plodded across the realm, while dragons circled the sun and the dead marched through the snow, the daughters of the North sharpened themselves in silence. And though none yet saw it, the old powers of the world were moving. The gods of fire and ice, of storm and shadow, calling their champions home. For in the song of Westeros, each note was born of blood, and the melody was far from ended. Winter was coming still, not the slow chill of seasons, but the true winter, the one that would swallow empires and crowns alike. And when it came, the ghosts of the Starks would rise once more, not as whispers, but as the storm itself. The wind howled over the ruins of Winterfell, carrying with it the scent of old ashes and snow. The castle, once proud and warm with life, stood hollow beneath a sky the color of iron. Its towers were broken, its walls half frozen, its courtyards filled with silence. But in that silence, a shadow stirred, not a ghost, but something close enough to one. Beneath the shattered keep, in the crypts where the kings of winter lay, torchlight flickered across stone faces. There, amid the carved wolves and the long-dead Starks, a lone figure knelt. It was Theon Greyjoy, though little remained of the man he had once been. His back was bent, his hands scarred and trembling. He had returned at last to the home he had betrayed, seeking not forgiveness, for that was beyond him, but perhaps the mercy of remembrance. "They will never forgive me," he whispered to the still air. "And why should they? I burned their sons, or thought I did." He pressed a hand to the cold stone of Lord Eddard's tomb. "I was your ward once, and your son's brother. I thought I could be more than what I was born to be, but I am no Stark, and no true Greyjoy. I am only Theon." Above, the snow thickened, falling in great soft flakes that muffled every sound. Yet far to the north, beyond the wall, there were no such mercies. Jon Snow rode through a night that seemed to have no end. The storm had swallowed sky and earth alike, and the world was a whirl of white. His horse labored through drifts, steam rising from its flanks. Behind him, a handful of black-cloaked brothers followed, the last of a doomed mission sent to learn the truth of the dead men's army. They had found that truth. Now they fled before it. "They're gaining," shouted Ed Tollett, his voice raw. "The dead don't tire." Jon glanced back. In the swirling snow, he could just make out the glimmer of pale shapes, a tide of corpses, endless, silent, relentless. And above them, the shadows of the White Walkers glided like phantoms, their eyes blue and cruel. "Ride for the wall!" Jon cried. "Ride and don't look back." But the wall was far yet, and the night unending. One by one, their mounts stumbled and fell. The world filled with the sound of shattering ice and the screams of men dragged into the dark. Jon turned in his saddle, Longclaw in his hand, its Valyrian steel shining with ghostly fire. "Come on then," he whispered. "You'll not take me easy." The first of the dead came at him, a boy no older than 15, his face blue, his eyes like frost. Jon's sword cut through him cleanly, yet the cold that spilled forth stung like a knife. The second came, then the third, until his blade was black with ichor that smoked in the snow. Then the White Walker appeared, tall and thin as a spear of ice, armor glimmering faintly beneath the storm. It moved without sound, its sword a shard of frozen crystal. Jon raised Longclaw. The blades met, and the air exploded with light and sound. The Walker's weapon shattered, scattering frost into the wind. Jon drove his sword through its chest, and the creature screamed, a sound that split the world. Then it was gone, melted into shards of snow. He had no time to rest. The others were upon him, and though he fought like a wolf cornered, they were too many. He called for Ghost, but the direwolf was far away, lost beyond the blizzard. Then the horn sounded. 3 blasts, long, mournful, unmistakable. "The others," whispered a dying man once, and Jon had prayed he would never hear that call again. But now it came again, nearer, closer, deeper, not warning this time, but defiance. For upon the hill ahead, black cloaks rode out from the white. The wall had not forgotten him. Fire roared suddenly to life, bursting from the snow. Torches soaked in oil, hurled by the watch. Arrows streaked through the dark, trailing flame. The dead shrieked as they burned, and Jon was hauled up onto a fresh horse, his brothers dragging him toward the gate. They reached Castle Black as dawn struggled through the storm. The fire in the courtyard burned bright, casting long shadows across the ice. Jon dismounted, blood freezing on his cloak, his breath ragged. "They're coming," he told the men gathered there. Not a handful, not 1,000, an army. The brothers of the Watch looked at one another in silence. They had known fear before, wildlings, famine, cold, but never this. "We hold the wall," Jon said. "Whatever comes, we hold." His voice was steady, though his heart thundered. He knew what it meant, that this might be their last stand. That night, as he stood watch upon the wall, a faint light glimmered in the far distance, a blue fire moving through the mist. He did not know if it was a star or a sign, but he watched it until the dawn came, pale and cold. Far to the south, in lands untouched by snow, Daenerys Targaryen stood upon the prow of her ship and watched the waves break. The fleet stretched behind her, 1,000 sails, black and red, bearing the dragon sigil of House Targaryen. Her dragons wheeled above, their shadows vast upon the sea. "Home," she whispered, "at last." Tyrion Lannister stood beside her, the wind tugging at his cloak. "You may find Westeros colder than you remember, Your Grace. It has a way of devouring those who seek to rule it." "Then let it try," she said. "Fire does not fear the cold." Behind them, Grey Worm's soldiers beat their spears against their shields, a rhythm that echoed over the water like thunder, and across the sea in the frozen north, Jon Snow watched that same horizon, unaware that destiny was already moving toward him, in sails and shadow, in fire and ice. The wall loomed silent, but in its heart, the old magic stirred once more. The realm had forgotten what true war meant, what true winter was, but soon none would be allowed to forget. The dragons had returned, the dead were marching, and the last blood of House Stark still beat strong in the dark, ready to rise. The first snows of true winter fell upon the wall like a shroud. The world had gone white and silent, the breath of men hanging like ghosts in the air. From East Watch to Shadow Tower, the Night's Watch braced for the storm they had long feared. The wall itself groaned in the cold, a living thing of ice and ancient power, older than any kingdom, and now besieged by death itself. Jon Snow stood upon its frozen height, his black cloak whipping in the wind. Below, the darkness moved. Not men, not beasts, but shadows given form. He could feel them even before he saw them, the White Walkers, riding at the head of their army of corpses. The dead advanced in silence, their numbers endless, their eyes burning blue. At Jon's side, Tormund Giantsbane spat into the snow. "I've fought men, and I've fought monsters," he muttered, "but never the cold made flesh." Jon nodded grimly. "Then you'll fight them all the same." The horns blew thrice, deep, mournful, trembling through the marrow of the wall. The brothers of the Night's Watch moved to their stations. Archers lined the ramparts. Catapults creaked as they were wound. Buckets of fire oil stood ready, their flames guttering in the wind. The first wave struck at dawn. The dead climbed the wall like spiders, heedless of pain, heedless of gravity. The archers loosed arrow after arrow, and still they came. Flaming pitch rained down, and still they came. Men screamed as skeletal hands seized them, dragging them from the battlements into the abyss below. Jon fought at the top of the stairs, Longclaw flashing silver in the pale light. Every blow he struck shattered flesh that was no longer living, but for each foe he felled, 2 more took its place. The world had become a nightmare of snow and steel and blood. Then, from the heart of the storm, the Night King appeared. He rode a dead horse cloaked in rime, his armor gleaming like the surface of a frozen lake. His eyes fixed upon Jon, and for a moment all sound died. No wind, no battle cries, only the whisper of death itself. Jon met his gaze and raised his sword. The Night King raised his hand. The ground shook. From the fields below, thousands of corpses stirred and rose, their movements slow and terrible. The fallen brothers of the Watch, the slain wildlings, even the enemy's dead, all stood once more, blue fire in their eyes. Panic broke among the living. Some fled toward the gate, others turned their blades upon their own fallen comrades. Jon's voice rose above the chaos. "Hold the wall! For the Watch!" he charged. The Night King dismounted and came to meet him, moving with inhuman grace. Ice met Valyrian steel in a burst of light. The impact sent a shock through Jon's arm that nearly tore Longclaw from his grip. He struck again and again, but the King of Winter was swift, his every movement precise, deadly. At last, Jon's sword found flesh, or what passed for it. The Night King staggered, and his scream split the heavens. The dead faltered for a heartbeat, their motion stuttering, but the reprieve was short. The king raised his hand, and a spear of ice formed within it. Jon barely leapt aside as it flew, shattering against the wall where he had stood. The blast threw him backward, his head striking stone. The world spun into white. When he woke, the battle was lost. The gate had fallen. The wall still stood, but the dead had poured through the breach. Men screamed in the darkness, their voices swallowed by the storm. He tried to rise, but his body betrayed him. Blood ran warm down his temple, freezing as it touched the air. The last thing he saw before his sight dimmed was fire, wild and fierce, blazing from the ramparts. Ghost. The great white direwolf leapt through the smoke, his fur alight with embers, tearing into the dead with savage fury. For a moment, Jon saw hope in that flash of flame and fang. Then the snow took him. When he awoke again, it was to the crackle of fire and the murmur of voices. He lay within the Lord Commander's chambers, his wounds bound, his head heavy. Beside the hearth, Melisandre knelt, her red hair gleaming in the glow. "You were dead," she said softly, her accent lilting like smoke. "But the Lord of Light was not finished with you." Jon stared at her, unable to speak. His chest ached with every breath, yet his heart beat on. "Why?" he rasped. "Why bring me back?" "The night is long," she whispered, "and full of terrors. You are needed still." He turned his face away. The world outside the window was white and endless. The wall still stood, but the dead had crossed. The north was lost unless they could find a new fire to fight the cold. Far to the south, in Dragonstone, Daenerys Targaryen stood before her council. Tyrion Lannister, dressed in black and silver, spread a map across the table, a great parchment of the 7 kingdoms. "The wall," he said, tapping the northern edge. "Our true enemy lies there, not in King's Landing." "Yet the lion still sits the throne," said Grey Worm. "If we leave her unchallenged, she will strike our flank." Daenerys's gaze lingered on the map. "I came to break the wheel," she said. But now the wheel itself is cracking. Perhaps it is time for fire and ice to stand together. Her words hung in the air like prophecy. By nightfall, her dragons rose into the sky, 3 black shadows against the moon. Their cries echoed across the narrow sea as her fleet turned north. In Winterfell's crypts, Theon knelt before the tombs once more. He heard the horns before he saw the riders, a column of men in black and gray, bearing the banner of the wolf. At their head rode Jon Snow, cloaked in furs, his eyes haunted. He dismounted without a word. "You came back," Theon said. Jon's voice was quiet. "So did you." For a moment, they stood in silence. The old gods watched from the weirwood roots, and somewhere deep beneath the earth, the wind sighed like the breath of the dead. "Winter has come," Jon said, "but it's not done with us yet." Outside, the first flakes began to fall once more, and in the far distance, beyond ice and shadow, a single roar answered the storm, the cry of a dragon, carried on the wind. Fire and ice were moving at last, their paths drawing inexorably together. And the song that began with one man's fall, the song of Ned Stark, first victim of the Lannisters, was not yet finished. It was only gathering its final verse. Winterfell breathed again. Smoke curled from its rebuilt chimneys, the scent of pine and burning peat drifting through the courtyards. The banners of House Stark, the gray direwolf upon the field of white, once more fluttered from the ramparts, defiant against the gray northern sky. The halls, once blackened and broken, had been mended by the hands of those who had never forgotten. The North had returned to its home. Sansa Stark ruled from the high seat of her fathers, clad in furs and velvet the color of snow. Her face was fair and solemn, her eyes sharp and steady. In her voice, the hall heard the ghost of her father's calm. In her bearing, they saw her mother's strength. But the girl who had once dreamed of songs and courts was gone. In her place stood a woman tempered by loss, forged by deceit, and crowned by endurance. The lords of the North had gathered in the great hall. They spoke of alliances, of ravens bearing grim tidings, of dead men walking and fire-breathing beasts that now shadowed the sky. "The wall has fallen," said Lord Manderley, his heavy face pale. "Eastwatch burns. The Night King marches south. His army is unending." Murmurs swept the hall like the rustle of leaves before a storm. Sansa's gaze fell to the fire, where the embers glowed red as blood. "Then we must stand, or we will fall as one. The dead care little for banners." Lyanna Mormont rose, fierce as her name. "The North remembers, Your Grace. We follow the Starks, as we always have." Others joined her cry, voices rough and honest. The old oaths still lived in their blood. Yet beyond their loyalty lay fear, not of men, but of the cold. Sansa stood. "My brother rides south with the Night's Watch. If the tales are true, he will not come back alone. A Targaryen queen marches with him, bringing dragons and fire." "Dragons," muttered one lord. "Monsters born of sorcery." "Perhaps," Sansa said, "but I would rather fight beside monsters than serve beneath corpses." The council broke with those words still echoing in their ears. That night, when the hall had emptied, Sansa walked alone through the courtyard, the snow falling soft upon her hair. She looked up at the towers, the stars faint and far above, and for a moment she saw her father standing at the gates, his cloak dark with frost, his face lined with kindness and sorrow. "You did not die for nothing," she whispered. "The North lives." Far to the south, the dragons came at dawn. Their shadows fell across the white fields like wings of night, their cries shaking the sky. Fire roared from their throats, melting snow into rivers of steam. Beneath their flight rode Daenerys Targaryen, her silver hair bound in braids of conquest, her eyes bright with purpose. At her side rode Jon Snow, black against the white, his face marked by the cold and by the weight of destiny. They had come from the ruins of the Wall, through lands buried beneath storms, leading an army of men who no longer feared death, for they had seen it. Behind them marched the unsullied, ranks unbroken. The free folk of the North moved with them, grim and fierce, their trust given grudgingly, but given still. They came to Winterfell beneath gray skies. When Jon dismounted, Ghost pressed against his leg, white fur dusted with snow. He looked upon the walls, upon the towers, upon the land that had made him. And for the first time in many years, he felt as though he had come home. Sansa met them in the courtyard. Her gaze fell upon Daenerys first, the dragon queen in her crimson cloak, her beauty terrible as dawn. There was wariness in Sansa's eyes, but also something else, curiosity, perhaps respect. "Winterfell is yours, while you need it," she said. Daenerys inclined her head. "I did not come to conquer the North, I came to save it." "Then we share a cause," Sansa replied. Jon stood between them, his expression unreadable. "The dead march south. The Night King has taken the ruined keeps in the wild lands beyond the last river. If we are to live, we must stand here, together." And so they prepared. The courtyards filled with the clamor of steel. Fires burned through the night as blacksmiths forged blades of dragonglass. Arrows were fletched, walls strengthened, trenches dug. The dragons hunted across the skies, their shadows crossing the pale snow. From the east, more came to join them, the Knights of the Vale, grim under their sky-blue banners, the men of White Harbor, marching through the snow. Even a few Southerners who had answered the call, though the road had claimed many. On the third night, as the stars burned like cold fire, Bran Stark called for his sister and brother. They found him beneath the heart tree, its white branches trembling in the wind. His eyes, strange and distant, gleamed like pools of starlight. "They are close," he said. "The wall is broken. The dead follow the Night King, and he rides a dragon now, a dragon of ice." A shudder passed through those who heard him. "How long?" Jon asked. Bran turned his gaze to the north. "Before the next full moon, they will be here." Daenerys clenched her fists. "Then we fight, and if the gods are cruel, we burn with them." The days that followed were a blur of preparation and dread. The skies grew darker, the air colder, the sun little more than a pale ghost behind clouds. The earth itself seemed to wait. On the eve of battle, Jon walked alone along the battlements. The fires below threw long shadows across the snow. Daenerys joined him, her cloak drawn tight, her breath misting in the air. "My father once dreamed of dragons ruling over a kingdom united by fear," she said quietly. "I do not want to rule the Ashes." Jon turned to her. "You won't, not if we stand together." She looked at him for a long time, her eyes softening. "You are a Stark in every way that matters, but there is more in you, Jon Snow, fire in your blood, though you do not yet know its song." He said nothing. The wind rose, carrying the sound of distant thunder, or perhaps the beating of vast wings. Before dawn, the horns blew. From the forests and frozen hills came the sound of ice cracking, of footsteps that did not belong to the living. The mist thickened, crawling over the ground like a living thing. The Night King's army had come. Sansa watched from the walls as the horizon turned white with death. The dragons screamed above, their fire casting brief golden light upon the advancing sea of shadow. Jon mounted his horse and drew Longclaw, its blade glimmering faintly in the gloom. Daenerys took flight upon Drogon, her dragon's roar answering the cold. The battle for Winterfell began. Fire against ice, life against death. The living world clinging to its last breath beneath a storm without mercy. And in the heart of the north, beneath the branches of the ancient heart tree, the old gods watched in silence, their red sap like tears frozen on their faces. The song of ice and fire had reached its long-awaited crescendo, and though the night seemed endless, the dawn had already begun to stir, faint, distant, but coming still. The long night fell over Winterfell. The air itself froze in the lungs of the living. Torches guttered in the wind, and the snow gleamed faintly under a pallid moon. From the battlements, the army of the dead stretched across the fields, a tide without end. Their silence was worse than any war cry. When they moved, the sound was 1,000 bones grinding against the frost. Jon Snow stood upon the ramparts, his gloved hands tight upon the stone. Below him, men and women waited in trembling ranks, the North's last defense. The fires of the trenches flickered in uneven lines, their warmth feeble against the cold. Beside him, Ser Davos Seaworth muttered a prayer to a god he did not trust, while the wind howled like a beast beyond the walls. "The dead don't tire," Davos said. "Then neither will we," Jon replied. The great horn sounded 3 times, slow, heavy, and final. The gates of Winterfell groaned open, and the Dothraki surged forth in a river of black horses and curved blades. At their head, their araks blazed to life, each flame lit by Melisandre's hand. The Red Priestess stood upon the field, her hair whipping about her face, her eyes glowing with the fire of her faith. "Vala Morghulis," she whispered. "All men must die, but not this night." Then the Dothraki rode into the dark. Their flaming blades cut bright arcs across the field, fire moving like the wings of a great bird. For a moment, it seemed as if they might break the tide of death. But then, one by one, their flames winked out, swallowed by the shadow. The night consumed them. A chill passed through the ranks upon the wall. In the silence that followed, the only sound was the distant scream of horses. "Light the trenches!" Jon shouted. Archers loosed their flaming arrows. The oil caught at last, and the trenches flared to life, encircling the castle in a burning ring. The fire danced upon the snow, casting ghostly shadows over the faces of the living. Then the dead came. They hurled themselves upon the flames, bodies piling until the fires smothered beneath their own weight. And when the last ember dimmed, the army surged forward again, thousands of corpses, eyes blue and pitiless. Steel met flesh, arrows hissed through the dark. The cry of battle rose, wild and desperate. Jon charged down from the wall, Longclaw gleaming in his grip. Ghost leapt beside him, white against the storm, a blur of fangs and fury. The dead fell before them, yet for everyone cut down, 10 more pressed forward. Jon's sword sang its cold song, cleaving through what was no longer human. His arms ached, his breath burned, but he fought on. Somewhere, he heard Brienne's battle cry and the roar of Tormund Giantsbane as he broke through a wall of corpses. Above them, the dragons wheeled. Drogon and Rhaegal burst from the clouds, their fire searing across the field. The heat melted snow and bone alike, carving swaths through the dead. Daenerys rode at the fore, her face a mask of flame-lit resolve. She saw the Night King upon his pale dragon, Viserion, circling in the dark sky, a creature of ice and death. The 2 dragons met with a scream that split the heavens. Fire clashed with frost, The sky itself seemed to crack. Below, men paused in their killing to stare upward at the storm of wings. Jon looked up and saw them locked in battle above the clouds. For a moment, his heart filled with a desperate hope that perhaps fire could win against the cold. But hope was fleeting. Viserion struck Drogon with an icy blast that froze one wing solid. The great beast fell, crashing into the earth with a sound like thunder. Daenerys rolled free, her cloak aflame, her face streaked with ash. She rose, gasping, and watched her dragon struggle to lift its shattered wings. Then the Night King descended. He rode through the air like a god of winter, his spear of ice gleaming blue. Jon saw him land upon the field, saw the ground itself freeze beneath his steps. He knew, in that instant, that this was no ordinary foe. This was death made flesh. "Jon!" cried Samwell, somewhere behind him. "The gods would! Bran!" Jon's heart turned to stone. Bran, his brother, the seer, the last of their line's true blood, waited within the godswood beneath the heart tree. The Night King would seek him, for through Bran's eyes flowed the memory of all men. Jon fought his way toward the castle, through the crush of dead and living alike. His lungs burned, his vision swam, but he pressed on. A wight lunged at him. He cut it down. Another, then another. He could see the weirwood now, pale, bleeding sap beneath the moon. Bran sat before it, motionless, his eyes white as snow. Theon Greyjoy stood before him, his face set in grim defiance. His arrows were gone, his spear was broken. Still, he faced the coming dark. "Go," Theon said as Jon reached the gate. "I'll hold him." Jon shook his head. "You've done enough." Theon smiled faintly. "Not yet." The Night King stepped into the godswood. The world seemed to hold its breath. Jon rushed forward, but the dead blocked his path, their hands cold as stone. Theon charged, his cry fierce and raw, his spear raised. He struck, and the Night King caught the weapon in one hand. With a single motion, he drove it through Theon's chest. The last Greyjoy fell. His face turned toward the sky, and for the first time in his life, he looked at peace. The Night King walked slowly toward Bran. "Do it," Bran whispered, his voice calm as wind. But before death could fall, a shadow leapt from the darkness, swift as an arrow, silent as snow. Arya Stark flew through the air, her blade of Valyrian steel glinting in the cold. The Night King turned, his hand closing around her throat. For a heartbeat, time itself froze. Then Arya dropped the dagger from one hand, caught it in the other, and drove it deep into his chest. The blade struck true. The Night King's eyes widened, 1,000 winters shattering in their depths. He crumbled into ice, his body breaking apart, the frost of his army melting into dust. The dead collapsed as one, their blue fire extinguished. Silence fell. Arya stood gasping, her hair streaked with blood and snow. Bran looked at her and smiled faintly, his white eyes returning to gray. "It was always you," he said. Outside, the dawn broke. The sky turned from black to gray, then to gold. Jon knelt beside the heart tree, his sword buried in the earth, his breath ragged. Around him lay the remnants of a war older than memory. Daenerys stood beside him, her dragon wounded but alive, her face streaked with ash and tears. She looked upon the rising sun as though seeing it for the first time. "It's over," Jon said. "For now," she replied, "but the wheel still turns." And in the distant south, where the red keep glimmered in the new light, Cersei Lannister awoke to the tolling of bells. She smiled, not knowing that the war she had ignored had been won without her, and that its survivors would soon come for her throne. Winter had ended, but the Game of Thrones had only just begun again. The fires burned for 7 days and 7 nights. From the fields of Winterfell rose the smoke of 1,000 pyres, and the air itself seemed to sigh with the weight of it. The dead had been given to the flames, for no grave could hold them, and no frost should claim them again. The snow melted where the fires raged, leaving behind blackened earth and the faint scent of ash and iron. Jon Snow stood before the last of the pyres, his cloak heavy with soot and grief. The bodies of his brothers, his friends, and countless nameless men lay before him. Ghost sat silent beside him, head bowed, eyes gleaming red in the dim light. The dawn beyond the flames was pale and cold, but it was dawn nonetheless, a thing the world had not believed it would see again. Daenerys stood across the fire, her face ghostly in the glow. Her dragons rested beyond the walls, their wings folded, their eyes dim with exhaustion. She said nothing, but Jon could see in her gaze the same emptiness that haunted his own heart. When the last body turned to ash, Jon spoke the words. "The long night has ended," he said, voice hoarse with smoke. "And yet the dawn brings no peace. The dead are gone, but the living are not free. There is still a queen upon a stolen throne, and her crown is bought with blood." Daenerys looked up sharply, her silver hair catching the first light of morning. "You speak of your kin, Lord Snow." "I speak of Cersei Lannister," Jon replied, "and of the realm she has bled dry. If we turn away now, everything we've lost will be for nothing." The queen's jaw tightened. "Then we march south." Sansa heard those words with a quiet dread. She stood upon the ramparts, watching the ashes rise. Winterfell had survived, but only barely. The walls were cracked, the courtyards red with the stains of war, the crypts filled with ghosts who would never truly rest. And now the survivors would leave, again, to fight a war that had never ended. That evening, she found Jon alone in the godswood, beneath the white branches of the heart tree. The red sap wept slowly down its trunk, like blood. "You would go," she said softly. "I must," Jon answered. "If we leave her upon the throne, she'll send her armies north in time. We'll have no peace here." Sansa's eyes shone in the dim light. "You have done enough. You fought the darkness itself. Let others fight this war." Jon shook his head. "The realm will not remember who fought for it, only who sits upon the throne." "And what of the North?" she asked. "What of us?" He turned toward her, his face shadowed. "Keep it safe. Whatever comes, you must hold the North." Her voice trembled. "As Father did?" Jon smiled faintly. "Aye, as Father did." By the next moon's turning, the host was ready. The banners of wolf and dragon flew side by side, though not all were easy with the sight. The men of the north looked upon the queen's army with wary eyes, the unsullied, grim and silent, the Dothraki, wild and fierce as the wind. But Daenerys rode at their head like a flame given form, her dragons soaring above, and even the most hardened men felt awe in her presence. Sansa watched them ride from the battlements, Arya at her side. "You won't go with them?" Arya asked. "I'll guard what remains," Sansa said. "The North is ours now. It will never kneel again." Arya's gaze followed the army's long trail through the snow. "I've no place here. My road goes south too." Sansa turned sharply. "You mean to kill her?" Arya did not deny it. "Cersei's on my list. She's been there since Father died." Sansa sighed. "Then may the gods watch over you." Arya smiled faintly. "They never have." The march to the capital was long and bitter. The roads were lined with the wreckage of the realm, villages burned, fields sown with salt. The Lannisters had strengthened the city walls, and Cersei's gold-cloaked soldiers waited like carrion crows. Jon rode beside Daenerys through the riverlands, where once her ancestors had conquered with dragons and blood. He felt the unease in his heart growing. Each time her dragons burned a field or a holdfast that refused surrender, he heard the cries of the dead and saw her father's shadow in her eyes. "Every tyrant says they fight for peace," he told her one night beside the campfire. She looked at him sharply. "And what would you have me do? Bend the knee to a queen who would see me hanged? Let the lions rule the cage again?" "I would have you rule justly," Jon said, "not through fear." Daenerys rose, the firelight flickering across her face. "Fear lasts longer than love." Jon stared at her, and for the first time, he saw how thin the line was between savior and conqueror. When they reached King's Landing, the city was already trembling. The bells tolled, warning of the Dragon Queen's arrival. From the walls, the Lannister archers stood ready. The streets below were filled with small folk clutching their children, praying to gods that had long abandoned them. Cersei watched from the Red Keep, her hand resting upon her swollen belly, her golden hair tangled by the wind. "They will not take my city," she said to Qyburn, her voice calm. "Not while I breathe." "Your Grace," the old man murmured, "they have dragons." Cersei smiled. "Then let them come. I will show the world what it means to be a lion." The battle began at dawn. The first roar of Drogon split the sky as flame rained down upon the city walls. Stone cracked and melted beneath the heat. The Lannister army broke before the fire, their banners turning to ash. Jon led the charge through the gates, cutting down what foes remained. The battle was short, brutal, merciless, and when at last the bells rang for surrender, the fighting should have ended, but it did not. Daenerys sat upon Drogon's back, the wind tearing at her hair. She looked upon the city, upon the Red Keep that had once belonged to her blood, upon the streets where her father's line had perished. She saw Cersei's face in every stone. She saw betrayal, fire, destiny. Then she gave the order. The dragon roared, and the sky turned to flame. Fire swept across the city, devouring stone, gold, and flesh alike. The screams of the dying drowned the bells. Jon shouted for mercy, but his voice was lost in the inferno. The streets became rivers of ash. The queen had come to break the wheel, and had become its turning. When it was over, the city was silent. The Red Keep lay in ruins, and the Iron Throne stood half-buried beneath the ashes of the hall. Jon found Daenerys there, her hand resting upon the melted swords, her eyes shining with tears and madness. "It is done," she whispered. "The world is free." Jon stepped forward, his heart breaking. "Free?" he said. "From whom?" She turned to him, her face radiant, her smile soft as snow. "From everyone." He kissed her then, one last time, and when their lips parted, Longclaw's blade found her heart. She gasped once, her breath a mist of white, and was gone. Jon held her as Drogon came, the dragon's cry shaking the broken hall. The beast lowered his head, touching his mother's still form, then looked to Jon. For a moment, man and dragon understood one another. Then Drogon took her body and rose into the sky, his wings beating against the smoke. He flew eastward, into the rising sun, until both were lost from sight. And so it ended, not with victory, but with silence. The Iron Throne melted into slag. The Red Keep lay in ruins. The realm awoke to a world without kings. In Winterfell, the snows began to thaw. The direwolves howled beneath a sky of gray, and Sansa Stark sat alone before the heart tree, her face calm, her crown of silver glinting faintly in the dawn. The long night was over, but the memory of its cold would never fade. For the North remembered. Always, the North remembered.